We're going to continue for the next 2 weeks just to kind of finish up or round off the story of John. Normally, we've John chapter 20 is Easter, big chapter, celebration, but there's a whole nother chapter. Surprise, there's an extra episode. And so like you have like the prologue or the epilogue, whatever you'd call it. I have an epilogue here. So we want to, for the next 2 weeks, we want to continue through the story of John since we've been walking from John 13 all the way to here. And then on our anniversary service, we'll focus in on some just things that God is doing and looking at a key passage for our own church story. So John chapter 21 today, we're not going to do the whole chapter. We're just going to do a couple of verses, which gives me a little bit of relief to not have to just slam through these verses. When about 14 years ago, I was getting close, 13 years ago, I was getting close to completing my doctorate degree in theology. And I was going to Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary down in Wake Forest, and was excited about it. I had been in school since essentially 2004 all the way to 2012. And so after undergrad and master's work and then doctoral work, I was really excited to be done. I was really excited to check off that box. And if you're familiar with doctoral work, the last few months are really intense because you're writing, you're researching, you're tweaking, you're fine tuning. Like it is just a lot of extra work. I would get up at 3:30 and do work. I would stay up till 11 sometimes doing work, and then getting up in 5 hours to do more work. Like you're just burning both ends of the candle through this process. And the one thing I was looking forward to through all of this, besides no one ever calls me Dr. Phil, but if they did, that would be cool, I guess. But what I was mostly looking forward to in this process was the graduation ceremony. To do this program, I would commute down to the school. I'd spend a week or two there on campus, do some classes, enjoy the local area. And I was looking forward to going down with my, at that point, young family of 4. And we were just going to enjoy the week in Wake Forest, North Carolina. We were going to go to all the restaurants I had spent time at, go to some of the playgrounds and parks and amenities for young families down there. Like the focus of my doctoral work was I'm going to have a vacation out of this at the end of this puzzle. And so we get in the car, the van at that time, with big plans to have this extraordinary experience. And wouldn't you know it, we hit someplace around Bristol, Virginia. I look back and I start seeing some green faces. And one of my kids decided to let out lunch and then continue to get sicker and sicker the entire time we were there. So instead of all these fancy, fun plans, we got to have an extraordinary experience locked in the Hampton Inn in Wake Forest. Instead of going to the nice restaurants I went at, I was bringing in fast food to the hotel. Instead of spending days going out to museums, I was talking to the pharmacies, trying to buy a nebulizer and get all these things going and fighting fevers with medicine. Like we were going to the drugstores, not the museums and the fun things. And so this time that I had planned on this being special, and it ended up being very different than what I planned. But you know what's interesting? By the way, we got better just in time for the morning of the graduation. My family was able to go, and we turned around and came home. And I thought about this. I had this big moment planned, but instead we had a very kind of ordinary experience. But it was still a good experience. Like we laughed at TV shows. We played card games in the hotel room. We had good conversations. We were trapped together. We had good conversations. And the more I started thinking about this is that often as a family, we hinge ourselves on the big moments, the Disneyland trips, the big vacations to the beach, the high points, right? We tend to build our lives around the high points. But it's often in the ordinary moments where we see movement happen. It's the car ride conversations to school. It's the dinner conversation when you linger a little bit longer. It's the random 10 o'clock at night when your kids are unusually chatty and you just sit and you get to hear about their lives in a unique way. It's funny how the unplanned, ordinary moments are what seems to catch our attention. And that's what we see here in John chapter 21. We see an ordinary moment become an extraordinary opportunity. We see, we've come out of, and here in John chapter 21, we've come out the biggest of all events in history, okay? Like that we've come out of the cross and the resurrection. It's all downhill from here. Like the cross and the resurrection outside of the second coming of Jesus Christ. I mean, there's a big old gap of ordinary in the middle compared to that. And so how do you even like think in terms of like, I've peaked, I saw Jesus die, I've seen him raise, what's left in my life? But here in chapter 21, Jesus shows up in the ordinary moments of these disciples' lives and brings an extraordinary opportunity to them. And so I want you and I to think about how Jesus meets us even in the ordinary moments of life. Because sometimes our faith looks like that. We think God will only move at the big worship services, at the Easter Sunday mornings when the whole room is full, at the big outreach event that has all the kids in the neighborhood because there 700,000 people show up at your church and get Easter eggs, or that God only moves at the mountaintop moments or this peak or that peak. But it's like spiritually, Jesus often meets with us in the ordinary moments. And what I mean by meets with us, I mean he reveals himself. He makes himself known to us. He works in our lives. He redirects our lives. He reminds us of who he is. He draws us to himself. He forms us into the person he wants us to be. That's how Jesus meets us. And often that takes place, not in the big moments, which are good, but often in the everyday, ordinary moments. And so we see that here with the disciples, how Jesus meets us in ordinary moments. Let me pray, and let me walk through these 14 verses together this morning. God, we thank you that you don't just work in the highs and low points of our lives, but you work in even the ordinary, mundane moments. That you show up in all of our lives, every decision, every thought, every moment. We can know your goodness and experience your goodness. And so, God, help us to see how you work in our lives in some of those seasons that may not seem like you are at work, or may not seem like you would show up, or may not seem like they mean much. But God, you show up and turn the ordinary into an extraordinary opportunity. So God, help us to see how Jesus engages with these disciples, how he turns them around from the direction they were heading. And God, help us to see how you step into our lives in these moments too. Thank you for getting us here this morning. Thank you for the celebration. Thank you that you are a God that works in the ordinary and even works when plans change. When things are different, God, you show up in these ordinary moments. Thank you for this morning. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So I got 3 quick ways that I believe Jesus meets us in ordinary moments of life. And here's the first one. I believe that Jesus often engages us and meets with us during and in our seasons of waiting. That Jesus shows up in those weird gap moments of waiting in life. And I think this is really important because most of our lives, we would define most of our lives in the big moments, the highlight reel, the exciting things. But the truth is, a lot of life is waiting. Waiting in traffic, waiting for your kids to find their shoes, waiting at a restaurant for dinner, waiting to get here, waiting for the call back, waiting for these things. And oftentimes we think of waiting time as wasted time. But that is not true in the economy of God. That waiting is an opportunity for formation when God is present. And so God can churn our waiting gap moments into formation moments. So here, verse 1. Here's how this passage begins. It says this: after this, Jesus revealed himself again to his disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. By the way, that's the Sea of Galilee. He revealed himself in this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, called twin, Nathanael from Cana of Galilee, the Zebedee's sons, and 2 other of his disciples were together. I'm going fishing, Simon Peter said to them. And we're coming with you, they told him. So let's stop right there for a second. Here's the scene. A bit of time has passed. We've moved locations from Jerusalem, where these disciples were hiding behind locked doors. Now they've come to the Sea of Galilee, where most of Jesus' ministry revolved around here, where most of them were even from. And so they've left the high city, if you will, the capital city, and they've moved down to where they're familiar. They've moved back into the rhythms of their lives. They've kind of, in some ways, gone back to the ordinary. And so Peter, being a person who is often unsettled, and I can relate to, goes, I'm not waiting, I'm going fishing. I'm tired of waiting, I'm going fishing. And the guys were like, sure, we'll come with you. So Peter's antsy. He's not really willing to just sit there and wait for the next thing. he goes out and he does what he's familiar with. He was a fisherman. A lot of them were fishermen. They go out fishing. Basically, they go back to work. They go back home and they go back to work. That's what happened after the climactic moment of Jesus showing up and showing you the holes in his hands, the holes in his side. They go back to work. And I can relate with Peter. I'm not going to sit around here and twiddle my thumbs. Let's do at least something. Let's keep busy. And many people have inferred, and I think I want to resist this in your minds. Some people look at this situation and have made whole sermons about how the disciples are drifting from their calling. And there may be some hint of truth to that. Like they leave the resurrection. Jesus has commissioned them to be missionaries, if you will, and hasn't fully done that yet in Acts chapter 2. But they go back home and they go back to work. And so I can see why you would look at that and go, man, they don't realize what Jesus has for them yet. They're drifting. They're going back to their lives. And I just don't see that evidence here as Jesus engages with them. I think what we actually see is Jesus in other gospels had said, go wait in Galilee and I'll meet you there. So they're actually not being disobedient. They're just going back to normal life while being obedient for Jesus. In other words, they're going back to work while waiting for God to give the next instructions. That's the most obedient thing I can think of. To just go through ordinary life knowing that Jesus has told you to wait. They're waiting and they're working and they're trusting that God will show up in their waiting. So to me, this is not a sign of disobedience. This is a formation moment where they're told to wait and Jesus is going to show up and is going to step into their lives. And so these disciples, they go back to Galilee and they begin fishing, and their life is in this gap between the resurrection and the commissioning that Jesus would give. And so they're just in this season of waiting, but Jesus is actually using this season to prepare them for what is next. The key here is that in this season of waiting, Jesus is actually forming them. And so you and I have to think about our seasons of waiting like this. When we are intentionally and maybe sometimes unintentionally waiting on God, when God has pushed a pause on something in your life, when you're waiting for the phone call from the doctor, when you're waiting for the job opportunity, when you're waiting for a church building direction, when you're waiting for your kid to get back from college, when you're waiting for this answer to come in, whatever season of waiting looks like, we can think of that as wasted time. But in those moments, God's actually forming us. It's not a pause on your life. God is often stirring in your life. It's seasons of waiting where your confidence and trust can build. It's seasons of waiting where Jesus can often waiting exposes my soul in a way I don't like. I don't like it when I have to wait, because it shows how impatient and how untrusting and how antsy I am and not content in the Lord. So these seasons of waiting, they tend to form us and make us more like Jesus. So again, waiting isn't wasted time, it's formation time, building you for what God has next. Think about it this way. Anybody seen, I do not try to spend a lot of time on social media, but I've seen the viral trend of like a Whitney Houston song, I Will Always Love You. Some of you know what I'm talking about. Others, this is the first time and probably the last time I'll ever mention Whitney Houston in a sermon. So if you like Whitney Houston, be ready for it. Cling on to this moment. But there's this, in the I Will Always Love You song, there's this gap between like a verse and the big, and I will always, right? And that gap, it's tricky. And here's why it's tricky from a musical standpoint. The tempo changes from 67 beats a minute to 59 beats a minute. Now, that way we're going to pass this challenge. And so what they do, so in this weird, overextended, it's slightly longer than it should be gap, the challenge was this. They put a drum in front of people and they give them a drumstick. And they play the clip, and your goal is to hit the drum at the exact time when it goes boom. And right? Has anybody seen this, or am I just making stuff up? Okay, a few of you know what I'm talking about, and the rest of you are going to be Googling it when you go home. When I think about that chorus, would you say that gap in that, if you're familiar with the song, if you're familiar with the challenge, that gap is not wasted time? The producer wasn't like, man, let's just leave this weird like 4-second gap in the song is wasted space. We ought to sandwich it together. That gap builds readiness for the return of the chorus. That gap builds anticipation, builds excitement, builds wonder, builds like anticipation of all the things that are going to happen next. And that's the way we ought to look at our waiting. That God is doing something and building in us, and this tension is getting us ready for the next thing God has for us. And that's what these disciples have as they're out fishing. They're waiting for Jesus to show back up and give them directions. And so your and our waiting's the same. I'll give you a couple of verses. Psalm chapter 27, verse 14. He says, wait for the Lord, be strong, and let your hearts be courageous. Wait for the Lord. Waiting takes strength. It takes courage. We need to wait for the Lord. How about James chapter 5? James experienced this. Therefore, brothers and sisters, be patient until the Lord's coming. Kind of personal, isn't it there? See how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth and is patient with it until it receives the early and late rains. You must be patient, strengthen your hearts, because the Lord's coming is near. Wait for it, be patient, the Lord is coming. So let me encourage you. I know waiting is hard. Waiting is especially hard for me. I'm right there. But one of the questions I always ask myself in waiting, and we should ask ourselves, is what does faithfulness look like right now? If you're in a season of waiting, even for a church, right? We're waiting for the next clear direction. What does faithfulness look like in the moment now for you? And let's chase after that. So number one, in the ordinary waitings, Jesus can show up and work and meet and build us. Now, here's the next thing. Not only does Jesus meet us in the waiting, but Jesus also meets us when we are dependent on him. Jesus shows up in our emptiness and our efforts, and we can be dependent on him. And so one of the things about ordinary moments is they can still teach us that we are dependent totally on Jesus, and we're empty without him. Look at verse 4. Actually, let's just start in verse 3. I'm going fishing, Simon Peter said to them. We're coming with you, he told them. And here's what happens. They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. That's not an exaggeration. That is literally nothing. They caught nothing. And so when daybreak came, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not know it was Jesus. Friends, Jesus called out to them, you don't have any fish, do you? No, they answered. I'm not a fisherman, but that's not the worst question to be asked. Like after, hey, what'd you catch? Nothing. Like I don't know if we're going to talk about that. But Jesus shows up. These disciples, now here's what's weird. They are experienced fishermen. These guys are professional livelihood built on fishing. They know how to fish. They know when to fish. They're out at night when fish take place. They have the right equipment, the right skills, the right time. They are doing all the things right, but there's no results. They're doing all the things right, but nothing is happening of significance. There is nothing going on. And so then Jesus shows up, and he's like, hey, you guys catch anything? And they're like, no. And for some reason, whether they don't recognize Jesus. Now, we know they're 100 yards off the water. They're 300 yards away, or 300 feet away. So I get maybe why they didn't recognize him. I also wonder if sometimes they were too focused on the ordinary, that they almost missed the extraordinary thing that was about to happen. So here's what Jesus does. Verse 6. Jesus says this. He commands them, cast the net on the right side of the boat. And he told them, and you'll find some. And so they did, and they were unable to haul it in because of the large number of fish. So Jesus, this random guy on the shore, yells out to them, well, hey, you've been throwing the net on the left side of the boat. Try the right side of the boat. This is not good fishing advice, okay? Let's be clear. Like this is not like, well, this is one of those people that at work give you a suggestion, like, have you tried to turn it off and on again? Yeah, yes, I've tried to turn it off and on again. Thank you, IT. Yes, I have cleared my cookies. Yes, like I've done all the things. This is not helpful fishing advice. This is not like, oh, I never thought about that. I feel like, now, to be fair, when Jesus first met these disciples, this is exactly the scene that happened. If you went back to Luke chapter 5, when Jesus first called these disciples, the same exact thing happened. They fished all night and were frustrated and effortless, like there was nothing from their efforts. And so Jesus showed up, did the same exact thing. So I wonder if in the back of their brains they're going, why not? Why not trust this guy? Something is going on here. Something extraordinary is going on here. Their hearts are being prepared for this moment. And Jesus shows up and he tells them, cast your net on the other side. And now there's such an abundant fishing catch that they can't even pull it physically. And it's too heavy to even get into their boats. They have to kind of hold it off to the side and do their best. Now, hopefully you figured this out by now. This is not about fishing. Jesus is preparing these disciples for something so much more than fishing. See, these disciples, they're about to be commissioned to take the gospel from Jerusalem to Judea to Samaria and to the ends of the earth. They're going to be the ones that will go and preach to the nations, who will see so many people come to Christ on the day of Pentecost, who will see the churches formed around the world, who will be missionary voices, who will often be martyred for their faith. These are the guys that are going to go and bring the gospel to the needy ears and hearts around them. And so what Jesus is teaching them is this: apart from me, you can do nothing. You can labor all night long, the right equipment, the right skills, the right activity, the right time, but apart from me, you can do nothing. Just a few chapters earlier, Jesus told them this in John chapter 15. He says, I am the vine, you are the branches. The one who remains in me and I in you produces much fruit, because apart from me, you can do nothing without me. Because you can do nothing without me. And so these disciples, they had to get this, because strategy and intention does not lead to fruitfulness if Jesus is not involved. Your life and my life has to be built on dependency in Jesus, even in the ordinary moments. And that's, in fact, I think that's where you practice dependency the most. We don't practice dependency on the crisis moments, but every single day, the boring moments, the mundane moments, we practice a total reliance, a total trust, a total dependency on Jesus Christ. We abide with him and we let him lead us. That's how we're called to live, because without him, we can do nothing. And so here's a couple thoughts before we move to the next point. Effort without Jesus always leads toward emptiness. Effort without Jesus always leads toward emptiness. Man, you're just treadmill living, doing your best, but apart from Jesus, you can do nothing. And so whether it's your own salvation, you're just trying to earn your right for God to like you, whether it's the mission of our church, we're trying to build something here and reach this community, whether it's personal growth or a temptation you're fighting, get it out of your heads that you can just hustle and you'll see results. Now, I'm not saying that our effort doesn't matter, but I'm saying apart from Jesus, our efforts don't matter. Yes, we work. Yes, we show up. Yes, we are strategic. Yes, we are intentional. But we do all of those things under the dependency of Jesus, because apart from him, nothing else to do matters. So we will always be empty, and our efforts will lead to emptiness without Jesus. And here's the other interesting thing. Jesus exposed their emptiness before satisfying it with fullness. What was the very first question he asked them? Do you have any fish? Jesus knew they didn't have any fish. He was the one that was supernaturally preventing them from getting fish. But he exposes their emptiness in order for them to be filled. And this is true for your spiritual life, that oftentimes Jesus will reveal the dissatisfaction and emptiness in your life, not in a way to hurt you or harm you, but in order to fill you with what matters. He'll make you hungry to see your emptiness so that he can show up and fill it. Psalm 127 verse 1 says this: unless the Lord builds a house, its builders labor in vain. Like you can build all you want, but unless God shows up, it's in vain. Unless the Lord watches over a city, the watchman stays alert in vain. I bet after a night of fishing, the disciples are frustrated, they're embarrassed, they feel pressure, they're confused, they're discouraged, they're exhausted. And that's what life feels like when you don't abide with Jesus Christ. You're trying to do all of this spiritual thing on your own power and in your own power. Exhausted, frustrated, discouraged, confused, pressured. Like that's how we feel when we don't lean into dependency, when we're not attached to the vine. So instead of focusing on the efforts, we have to first focus on the relationship. And from that, everything flows. And so let's look at dependency and in ordinary moments of life, walking that with Jesus. Jesus teaches them dependency while they're even out fishing. And so here's the third point. Jesus meets us in our hesitancy. These guys, the ordinary moment of their life, they are confused and concerned to press in. And Jesus uses an ordinary breakfast to invite them out of their concern and out of their hesitancy. They're slow and scared to approach Jesus, but, well, that's not quite true. Peter is not slow, and I forgot the part about Peter here. Notice what, let's go back actually to verse 6 in the middle there, verse 7. Now, when Peter, verse 7, the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It's the Lord, it's Jesus." And then when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he tied his outer clothing around him, for he had taken it off, and he plunged into the sea, since they were not far from land, about 100 yards away. And the other disciples came in the boat, and they dragged the net full of fish. Now, I love this scene. It's almost like a side note, because John's got issues with Peter. He's always poking at Peter. I don't actually think he has issues, but he mentioned that he was the first of the two and Peter was second. He's just got a little like a brotherly poke there, I feel. But Peter, he hears that it's Jesus. He doesn't wait for the fish. He jumps in the water, swims to the shore, and leaves all the other guys there to clean up. And by the way, I've been to church events like that, where everyone goes home and we're out there. Everyone knows us. I wonder what the disciples are thinking. They're like, "Thanks, Peter. So glad you get to go see Jesus. Now we got to drag in these fish. So glad you get to do this." But then I started thinking about it. I think Peter shows us the attitude that we should have. Here they have their ordinary jobs, and when Jesus shows up, he's willing to say, "That doesn't matter anymore. I don't care how big of a catch that is practically. Jesus is on the shore, and I'm going to him first. And so I'm willing to leave whatever it is behind to chase after Jesus." But the other disciples were practical. "Hey, we got 100 some fish. This is some good money here." I don't know their motives. We don't see that, but that excitement to see Jesus is key. But as we step into this rest of this passage, there's a hesitancy here. Verse 9. Keep on wanting to go to verse 20 for whatever reason, but verse 9 is the verse we're going to. When they got out on land, they saw a charcoal fire there with fish laying on it and bread. "Bring some of the fish you've caught," Jesus told them. And so Simon Peter climbed up and hauled the net to shore full of large fish, 153 of them. And even though they were so many, the net was not torn. "Come and have breakfast," Jesus told them. And none of the disciples dared to ask him, "Who are you?" because they knew it was the Lord. Do you feel the hesitancy there? They know this is Jesus. Peter's literally swam to the shore knowing it's Jesus, but they're hesitant to step into a relationship with Jesus again. They're hesitant to approach Jesus. And there's all these big feelings. There's shame from their betrayal and their denial and their running away. But there's relief that Jesus is alive. There's hope that Jesus is alive, but there's still fear of what he's doing. There's doubts of their worth and their betrayal, but there's also promises of belonging. So they're wrestling with all these things. And so there's a caution or that hesitancy to step in with Jesus. And notice how Jesus invites them. Very ordinary thing. Notice how Jesus brings them in. In verse 13, Jesus came, took bread, and he gave it to them, and he did the same with the fish. And this was now the third time that Jesus appeared to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. Just a very ordinary thing. These disciples are hesitant to go with Jesus. He invites them to his table. He breaks bread, he breaks fish, and he gives them. And this is an ordinary thing they've seen Jesus do over and over again. Whether it's the feeding of the 5,000 or the Last Supper, Jesus has broken bread before them many times. It's a familiar thing. They've eaten many meals together. And so Jesus shows them this ordinary action, this ordinary invitation. He invites them to the table. But this is so much more than just breakfast. You see, I think this teaches us something really important, that the table of Jesus is an invitation to the weary and the hesitant, To those who are concerned, those who are broken, those who are trying to understand what's going on, there is an invitation to come to Jesus and be in relationship with him. For those who have just labored all night on their own efforts, there's an invitation to come sit with Jesus and trust in his efforts. Give your efforts to him. And so this invitation is to those who aren't quite ready, but Jesus calls us in. And we see this invitation all throughout Scripture, that it's okay if you're hesitant. Jesus understands that, God understands this, but you're invited to come into his table. Isaiah chapter 55 verse 1 says this amazing verse, "Come, anyone who is thirsty, everyone who is thirsty, come to the water, you without silver, come buy and eat. Come buy wine and milk without silver and without cost. Just come, you who are thirsty. Come, you who are not satisfied, and I will provide." Come. You don't have to perform. You don't have to prove. You don't have to fix yourself. Just come. Jesus invites them in. Draw near to Jesus. So this whole scene takes place in a very ordinary moment, or what could have been a very ordinary of their lives. They're out working, out fishing, but Jesus shows up. He shows up and they're waiting. He shows up to prove that we must be dependent on him. And he shows up and invites them in even in their hesitancy. And so I think that's key. Jesus meets us in our emptiness and invites us close to him. See, I know that today, there are potentially all of us at some level have come into this room with an emptiness that only Jesus can satisfy. There are things in life we're chasing after, we're not content about, we're struggling with, we're fighting temptations, whatever it might be, that we are. There's an emptiness in all of us that we're constantly having to choose to be satisfied in Jesus. And so I want to encourage you today, choose to be satisfied in Jesus. Come to that table and be satisfied. Jesus came, lived that perfect and sinless life, died on the cross for our sins, was buried on the third day, then rose again. And he invites us to find forgiveness of our sins, to enter into relationship with God, into a new life that was promised through his resurrection, and live for him. And so that invitation is true for us today. I hope you respond to that. Don't leave today empty, but leave satisfied and living satisfied in Jesus Christ. Let me pray. God, thank you for this morning. Thank you.